Bonjour tout le monde, welcome to the Flagship Podcast. I'm your host, Nectar. This show brings you inside stories from the Canadian technology ecosystem. You'll hear from founders, investors, builders, and learn about their triumphs, hardships, and hard-earned lessons. You'll learn about the strategies and tactics they use, but also the human side about what it takes to build a thriving company, which will hopefully help you on your journey.
Prêt à commencer. Au-delà du capital et des relations d'affaires, le branding d'une firme de gestion joue un rôle clé dans sa capacité à se démarquer auprès des entrepreneurs et des commanditaires. Le marketing agit comme un catalyseur de cette réputation au sein de l'écosystème, mais il ne se suffit pas à lui seul. Une firme doit trouver sa niche et mettre en avant ses différenciateurs pour bâtir une marque forte. Pour en discuter, nous avons le plaisir d'accueillir Whitney Rockley de McRock Capital, Amélie Foz-Couture de Diagramme et Clement Bourgogne de Jolt Capital. Ils répondront aux questions de Nectarios Economakis d'Amiral Ventures. Particularité de ce panel, il sera enregistré et diffusé sous peu dans le podcast Flagship, émission très populaire dans notre industrie. Donc, sans plus tarder, j'invite Nectar à débuter. Merci Nectar.
Merci beaucoup, Olivier. Thanks to our esteemed panelists for being here. I think at least one person had to travel. So Whitney came in from Toronto, and thanks for everyone for being in the audience. We're going to talk about a topic that I think is very apropos and I think very interesting, a little bit different than, I guess, most of the other conferences today. We're going to talk about marketing and branding. And maybe as a first question, I want to throw one to Whitney, I think, because if you don't watch McRock's videos every year, you're missing out. I know there's quite a few LPs that have told me, I can't wait for the McRock videos. So maybe, Whitney, I'd ask you, since you and Scott really came up with this idea of like grassroots marketing, as we were saying, why did you guys do it? And then second, what's been the benefit?
Yeah, so thank you. And this is so fun. When I was first asked to come on the panel, I was really excited because rarely do we talk about marketing and branding. And so this is a great topic. So if I go back to, it's more than a decade now, Scott and I, my co-founder, Scott McDonald and I, who two of us had worked together for many years, we were embarking on the creation of McRock in a specialization that was really unique. At the time, we were focused on the industrial Internet of Things, and now we just focus on industrial software. But nobody really knew what it was. And I was telling Nectar that we had this fun story of we were watching the Steam Whistle co-founders, and every time they hit the stage, they had their green glass bottle of Steam Whistle, and they had this product, and everybody would just smile because it was beer. And we thought, wow, our product is us. Our product, it's the people. So how do we show them our product? And it came down to our personalities. So we said, and this is at the time, so no offense to where we are today, but 10 plus years ago, it wasn't that hard to differentiate yourself. And so Scott is a former Olympic gymnast. He is a crazy performer. And we are going to document our journey of creating McRock and launching our first fund. And so we literally on our iPhones and our iPads, we started documenting it. And I was terrified. Absolutely. I couldn't say my name properly. We had to do multiple takes on things. And eventually we got better and better. But what happened was we got this incredible following of entrepreneurs. And the entrepreneurs were like, wow, we finally know who like a couple of investors are in our ecosystem because they're showing us their personality and we're not as intimidated to approach them. And they seem crazy and nutty and fun, and we're crazy, nutty, and fun. Wow, maybe this could be an investor we could attract. And so we got a really good entrepreneurial following from it. And what people remember 10 plus years later are the crazy McRock videos. And most of our videos from inception are still on our website, so you can sit back and watch. And now as we got busier, we couldn't continue with the video. So we just do one annual holiday video. And our LPs are like, when's the annual holiday video coming out? And we're like, it's coming out. And now it's a little bit more of a production. But in addition to the video, we did a ton of thought leadership, and we always hosted a grand symposium, and we always picked Montreal because we were forever grateful to Terralist at the time and BDC Capital for coming in to be our anchors in Fund One. And we brought CEOs from around the world to Montreal that spoke about our sector. So there was a whole bunch of education that happened. But a lot of folks remember the videos. And to this day, our LPs love them. They didn't always love them at the beginning, but our entrepreneurs have always really appreciated that.
I think it's an awesome example of doing a lot with not a lot of means and creating a standout brand. So being very intentional. And maybe I'd ask Amélie, because Diagram is also a very strong brand. At least everyone in this ecosystem knows you, but you've been much more low profile in terms of your marketing activities. So curious to hear you about maybe power of word of mouth and how you've thought about the Diagram brand.
Yeah. So going back to how you started, Whitney, it was funny when you guys asked me to be on this panel. My initial reaction was, are you sure? We don't have marketing as a line item in our budget. I don't know what I can really say about this. And an interesting conversation ensued where you pointed out, well, maybe that's what you can say about it. So yeah, I think the way I think about it is the marketing and the branding has to be consistent with obviously the fund strategy. And our strategy is very specific in a couple of ways. One is the scale and the kind of volume of deals. So today we're deploying 2 funds, a fintech fund, a climate tech fund that I lead. We're at about 400 million in total, but we've always had a very focused and concentrated strategy. This year, we'll be looking for probably 10 teams to back through our venture creation strategy and about the same number in which we can invest at the pre-seed and seed stage. So we're not talking about a lot of volume. And I think that has driven a lot of our thinking, because when those are the numbers that you're talking about, frankly, a lot of what we do is more relationship based and really getting to know the founders that we think could be interested in launching their next thing with us. And because of the numbers that we're talking about, it actually scales decently well you'd be surprised how much cold outreach I do on LinkedIn to founders and just literally ask them to have lunch or coffee, understand what types of ideas they're interested in. And that has worked for us. But again, I think it has to be consistent with the strategy. The second thing that's unique about us is, again, the majority of what we do is we build companies in-house. We nurture them up to a certain point, and when we're convinced, we look for founders with whom to partner. Again, our audience, the nature of our message is very different than marketing yourself to receive inbound deal flow. And so what I have found is that I prefer to let the idea itself do the talking, because the important thing is that the founders need to fall in love with the problem. They need to be excited to spend the next 10 years of their lives building a company to solve that problem. And when we start talking to them, it's useful that they know about Diagram. It's useful that they have obviously a positive association when they see my name in their LinkedIn inbox, et cetera. But the first conversation is always, here's the problem that we've identified. Here's why we think there's an opportunity to build a generational company in this space. And they fall in love with that first. And then we talk through what it means to build with Diagram. I guess what I want to say is we have chosen that strategy because we think it's consistent with our model and it's worked well for us, but I could see that it might not apply to everyone.
I'm going to come back to what you said. I'm very curious to hear about maybe V2, but I want to also bring Clement into the conversation. And Clement, maybe if you wouldn't mind starting by saying what Jolt is, because you guys are the new kids on the block, at least in Canada. So maybe people might not be familiar with Jolt's long history, but also thinking about how you're now building a new brand here in this country, or adapting the brand. So thinking about this as your new strategy.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I think my reaction when Jolt approached me to the expansion in Canada was, who are you? Just like everyone in this room is, what is Jolt? What do you guys do? And I think the question of branding is quite paramount when you're talking about a fund that's niche or that's doing something that not everyone is doing. So very briefly, Jolt is a growth equity fund specialized in deep tech. Deep tech meaning companies that are anchored on original IP. So it's not a sector. Like deep tech is a very cryptic word, and people think it's Web3 or it's quantum. Our definition is fairly basic. It's just companies anchored on IP. And so you can invest in lots of sectors when you do that. Semiconductors, AI, cybersecurity, medtech, advanced materials, energy mobility. There's lots of places where IP is a very key differentiator. And that's the space we like to play in because we're all kind of geeky and engineers. And that's what I loved. That's what I fell in love with Jolt. And the brand is, in my opinion, supposed to represent who you are, your identity and your conviction as an investor. And so when Jolt comes to Canada, the idea is not to change that identity. It's maybe to adapt the communication to the local norms. We're also expanding in Japan at the same time. And of course, you can't make the same cultural references in Japan as you would in Germany. But that's really the point, is you have to stay true to who you are, your conviction. And then you try to embed this into the different aspects of your brand. If anyone's a math whiz here, you may know that Jolt is not just a common word we say. It's actually the second derivative of speed. It's the acceleration of acceleration, if you will. And if there's anyone who's too mean in the room and who's really good in math, you'll know that the real word for that is jerk, but a synonym is Jolt. So we chose Jolt because we thought it was a little bit nicer as an investor. But again, you try to build that brand by embedding who you are. That's why a very core part of what we do is anchored around our internal platform. We call that Ninja because for us, and I speak as if I were there when it happened, but this is how it happened. Ninja is just this amazing tool that does things that a ninja would do, like in the shadows, lurking, and then it surges and does something amazing. And again, if you're geeky, you're an engineer, you might as well embrace it. And at the same time, this is what I loved about Jolt, is you can mix like a true hardcore engineer who will go into not white papers, like actual technical papers of the error corrections on quantum. Like I actually read the paper by Google and I had read the one on before that. I love this, but at the same time, our AGM is in Versailles. And so we spend the whole day talking about like super high-tech stuff. And then at the end of the night, we go to the Royal Chapel and hear a Baroque music concert. And so it's just who we are. Like our founder loves Baroque music. Not necessarily my favorite type of music, but it's fun from time to time. So to go back to how do we bring Jolt here and adapt to Canada, I think you adapt your communications. You don't adapt who you are. That's who we are. We're coming to Canada because there's a massive opportunity here. Great country and very similar to countries like France, Germany, Japan, Korea in terms of tech. The country is filled with tech. It's just a subscale economy. And so the typical model for more generic tech is you take a company that works in a country like France and as soon as it's big enough, you send it to the US for it to explode. That doesn't work in deep tech. It's not the same. Like you don't have millions of clients across the world. You have a few dozen. And so you need to go to all of these subscale countries and sell to the clients there. And so Canada is a great place like that. And so our identity is this. And so you can't change who you are. If you try, you're actually going to miss the mark because you're going to try to say something that's not who you are. And then people will walk away.
You said something that really stuck with me, this notion of staying true to yourself, like with brand identity, and makes me think about you, Whitney, in particular, this notion of being unapologetically authentic, right? Which is what you get. And you mentioned this, right? It serves you well with founders, right? It serves you well with LPs. What are your thoughts around that in terms of the actual McRock brand?
And you bring up so many really important parts because I think for longevity of brand, you do need to have that authentic personality, which comes from the people, and especially in what we do, the people mean everything. So very early on, we said we want the world to know that we don't take ourselves seriously, but we take what we do highly seriously. So all of our quirky, homegrown McRock videos, they tend to resonate the most with entrepreneurs who are just trying to do the very best they can. They know what it's like to go without a paycheck. They're trying just to get to that next level and challenge themselves. And so it's a relatability that they see because of the journey that we took to create the firm. And just for those that don't know the story, but it's well documented, it was 1,067 days with no paycheck. And we actually have it fully documented. So you really see this rawness, this authenticity that I think resonates with the entrepreneurs. But I will say the LPs, they really care about the thought leadership. And the thought leadership can come in lots of different ways of kind of marketing or branding. But white papers and infographics and what you were just saying, how cool. Like I had so many ideas that were popping in my head. you could actually just do 1-minute deep dives of nerdy deep tech stuff that makes just people laugh and go, oh my God, I want to watch more. I want to learn more. And it's how you take folks on the journey. But we did a lot of infographics, a lot of white papers. We did the symposium. We flew in to Montreal, and we do it every year. The head of corp dev, the CEOs of some of the largest corporations, and we focus on industrial software. So some of the largest corporations come into Montreal, and the CEOs are taking the stage and saying, this is why we care about digital transformation in industrial markets, full stop. And one of the questions that we were going through during the prep was, is there an ROI? So if you go back to the lessons you take around marketing, how do you prove that it's effective? And it was a great question. And I thought about it after we had our prep call. With our symposium that we do, one of the companies that we backed, and I had the pleasure of serving on the board of, is one of the co-founders of Admiral, which just love your fund and what you're doing, is Fred Bastian.
Thank you.
Over at Nubo. And Nubo was one of our early, I think they were our second investment that we had ever done at McRock. And like you, we don't do many investments. So we do only about 10 per fund. And we don't have as much capital. We're about 300 million of assets under management. And Fred and Addie, they loved our symposium. They loved the executives that we were bringing in, and they saw purchase orders from these customers. And so we helped them with one of their major purchase orders in their early years. And then we came in the Series A alongside of White Star, and Series B round came, and Munich Re, Hartford Steam Boiler Ventures, they were at our symposium. They met Fred, and they wanted to lead as a strategic the Series B round. Had we not done that symposium, it was probably unlikely that Nubo would have had access to Hartford Steam Boiler. But the really cool part that happened is the CEO of Aspen Tech, which eventually acquired Nubo, they found Nubo through our symposium. And the CEO, Antonio Pietri, Aspen Tech became an LP in McRock and has subsequently invested in multiple funds. But what was so cool is that he called us up and he said, we've got this data analytics platform company that we're looking to acquire. And I think I want to put it on ice because I really like what Nubo's doing. Do you think we have a shot? And we were like, yeah, let's see what we can do. And then we connected Fred and the team to Aspen Tech, and that's how they were acquired. And it was a beautiful exit for the team at Nubo. And it was a super healthy revenue multiple, and everybody was just really pleased with that. But it would not have happened had we not done our thought leadership and our symposium in Montreal. But that's the more serious side of it, right? That kind of comes from.
Honestly, it's a very important point because especially when you're specialized fund or specialized investor, you have to make people care about what you care about. And so it's not just about convincing an LP that you're good. If you're only talking about yourself, everyone will stop listening. So how do you make people care about what is so important? And you need the tide to rise. That's how deep tech was not a thing 13 years ago when Jolt was created. Our founder was laughed at when he said he was quitting Sophie Nova, one of the big VC funds in France, to launch like a growth equity fund on deep tech. Like people were literally telling him you're committing career suicide. And then you need to educate people with white papers, and you can do this the way you are. Sometimes it's with humor. Sometimes it's like our approach is similar. It's not a symposium. It's actually, we try to, again, go back to the European heritage of the 18th or 19th century discussion salons when you had people like the brains of the world that came to discuss, and you try to animate that, bridge the gap between the investment world and the tech world that doesn't necessarily understand or talk to each other. But you need people to care about what you care about. And so that's what the branding is also supposed to convey. And this is so critical when you're a specialized fund.
Maybe a question for you, Amélie, is we're speaking a lot about the founder DNA and founder of the firm DNA, clearly with Whitney and Scott, and we see with Jolt and Francois, and we know him a little bit, but he's more introverted, right? But extremely brilliant, right? So how do you think about the brand of Diagram evolving in line with your strategy? Is it going to evolve in your view? And at the same time, if it ain't broke, don't fix?
Yeah. What this makes me think of is, like, how do you scale it, right? Because obviously it's a people business. It's interesting. The other particularity of our model is that we actually have a pretty big team. So we're about 30 people at Diagram because, again, a big part of that team is creating companies. But those are all people that are out there in the market, that are representing Diagram, that are bumping into our LPs at events, that are meeting a lot of founders. And I think one thing that François and the team have done really is we have one way that your brand lives is through your values, right? And it's okay, you can define the brand, but then you have a bunch of people that are out there that are going to be representing it and that are going to be either consistent or not consistent with it. And so for us, our values have been really a useful tool in that, which I think is not necessarily something you think of as a marketing tool, but to me, it is in a way. We have 5 values. We are entrepreneurial, we are innovative, we are rigorous, we are authentic, and we are collaborative. And everybody, I would hope, a Diagram could recite those off the top of their head if woken up in the middle of the night. But we take them very seriously. And at our quarterly offsites, we actually always nominate a handful of people from the team and we highlight how they've embodied a certain value. And I think that's one way to, going back to your question, that as the founder or the leadership of the firm, I think you can syndicate and grow the brand that you want your platform to have. But it takes effort to educate the team and to reinforce it. And I don't know if that answers it, but that's, I think, what has been our best tool.
I want to build on this because it's really interesting because how do you align? I think one of the thoughts we had in preparation for this, how do you align individual brand with the firm's brand? And I think you're spot on. I think it comes down to a core value that you share as an individual and the firm shares. And if you can get that core value alignment, then it's a thing of beauty. The struggle, and I'll be very candid here, the struggle that we've dealt with is how do you, when you've got a founder personal brand, how do you translate that into a longevity firm brand? And that's something that we've been working on with our team because we're each really individual and unique. And you can't clone each other and say, okay, now you carry the baton and away you go. So as we start looking at succession planning, which is really important, it's about really like bringing the individuality and the authenticness and the superpowers of each of our senior team members and teasing that out in their personal brand, but also knowing, because we've had a lot of time, we've never, knock on wood, we've never had anybody at McRock quit in the years we've had our firm. But we know that the core values of the individuals are aligned with the core values of McRock. And one of our core values, believe it or not, is humility and kindness. Because we find in the investor landscape, at least in the 20 plus years, 25 years we've been doing it, that it's sometimes hard to find people who want to compete, achieve, be fast, be creative, and also are humble and kind. So we do a lot of testing when we're bringing people on to try and get that core value alignment. And then that helps with the authenticity of the personal brand. That personal brand is so important, right? Because if you have a misalignment with the core values, you're at odds with each other in the world of social media.
There are a lot of managers in this room. I think they're listening, paying attention, and we're like, okay, I want to maybe up my game. What do you guys think is the underrated aspect or misunderstood aspect of marketing/branding?
I'll make a comment. I think people think it's expensive. And when you do grassroots marketing like we've done, we did it ourselves and it really wasn't. I think in the first 5 years, I don't think we would have spent more than like $1,000 a year on it. As we've grown up as a firm, we now actually have a small marketing group that we work really closely with, and we have for about 5 years. And we do have one independent videographer who we just love. And he helps us with a lot of our crazy annual holiday video looks and feels. But that's it. It's not as crazy. So the myth is it's expensive. It's not. It really is not. In today's day and age, it's not.
It's not that expensive. There is that belief that you need to do things the way others are doing them. And so like that can get expensive, right? Because the typical even startup model is you build a fancy website and then you have all this marketing dollars and then you need to measure ROI. And that's okay for certain types of businesses. I don't know that for an investment fund, it's the same dynamics, perhaps for some, but so it is expensive. But I think the trap is trying to do what others do. And I mean, I 100% guarantee that you've heard every corporation say innovation is in their DNA. So once you start hearing this from everyone, it means nothing. Like it's completely empty. And so if you're just trying to emulate something but do it slightly different, it's not going to work. You're not going to differentiate yourself. You're not going to say, here's who I am. Like you're just saying, I want to be like another person who's in this crowd. And yes, it doesn't need to be that expensive, but you don't have to fit to a mold. And I think that it's for a risk-taking business, it's a very conservative business when it comes to the image you portray for LPs but at the same time, this is what LPs will look for. And I don't want to speak on their behalf, and I love you all. You need to show that you know something, you're good at it. Ultimately, our job is to return money to them. There's different ways to do that, but they need to trust that you're going to do it in a professional way and not like everyone else.
Yeah. I don't know the only thing that I want to react to, and it's just sometimes on a panel, it's better if we slightly disagree. So I'm just but I think the one thing that I have a hard time measuring ROI on is not so much the spend on like website or whatever. It's more the time, because time is the challenge, right? So again, like that's always how I think about it is, are we spending our time on the right things? And yeah, I think for us, we have found that just again, at the scale that we're at with the objectives that we have, like I spend the vast majority of anything that is marketing related. I focus it on one thing, and it's founders, because that's the most critical thing for us. And it's like very simple. It's basically a website and our LinkedIn presence. Like there's nothing else to it. And just my calculus is I'd rather invest the time to go and meet founders in the community that have recently exited, that might be looking for their next adventure. In a way, you could say that's an incredibly not scalable strategy. That would be a fair challenge, because I'm spending an hour to go meet someone for coffee, and the answer might be like, I would never consider working with you, or I don't want to launch another company, or I'm not interested in climate, or whatever. But yeah, have an easier time measuring ROI on that. And I do track it. Like I'm a recovering product manager, so I have a really detailed CRM, and I obsessively track like my conversion on these, and it continues to be a good strategy. So I don't know.
What I think though, with what I heard, is your model is very local, right? And so with us, again, we invest in Canada, the country to the south, and Europe. And so we have to reach just a totally different group. And we also do later stage. We're looking at companies that are at least at 1 million in trailing 12-month revenue. And we have companies in our portfolio now that are 200 million in revenue. And so we tend to lean in a little bit later, but it's geographical reach. So it, again, makes sense with what you're doing. But for many of us, we're trying to get, like, the world has to be our oyster. And to your point, you don't want to sound like all the other groups out there, because so many of them sound the same. So you need something. And
the common mistake, and I might even be a culprit of that, is that saying know your audience doesn't mean change your branding for your audience. It just means make sure that what your audience cares about, they get it. But that doesn't mean change who you are based on your audience. And that's, I think, maybe a very easy trap to fall into is, when I'm talking to founders, I'll say one thing and then I'll say something else to LPs. I don't know that this is like how you build this long-lasting brand. You need to be recognized for who you are. And that there are good things, there are bad things. But that's okay. Like, go to you for what they like.
Yeah. Hearing two things that stand out is, one, I guess the good news is that there's multiple ways to win, right? There's not one recipe, which is, I think, a good thing. And the second, maybe a bit more esoteric, but really important in my view, is this notion of trust, right? Which is, I think, the foundation of building a brand is trust, which is based on consistency. Do you agree with that statement? And then I would ask, do you see the trust element different for LPs and then for your founders? What's the through line there?
Yeah, I'll jump. Yeah, you're 100% right. Trust is imperative. But what I will say is we have to consistently show up time and time again, whether it's through our marketing and our branding, but we can't be too far off from who we are and how we show up. And I also think that we need the breadth and we need the depth, and that consistency is critical. How we show up with investors, to me, we have to be professional, responsible stewards of capital, full stop. We have to return. We have to have DPI. DPI matters. And we have to, again, many years ago, this founder that Scott and I had backed, he had this expression, he called it the say-do ratio. You do what you say. And if you don't do what you say, then there is no trust. And so again, on everything that you do, you've said, and everything you've said, you do, and it all triangulates. And I think that is how you build the trust. With the founders, the relationship tends to be a little bit different in the sense that a lot of times you're coaching and you're working with each founder slightly differently based on where they're at in the stage, where they are with their skill set, who they've got as their team. And so you morph into different kind of helpful advisor guidance to the founders, but everyone's really different. So again, that consistency and steadiness and partnership is really critical.
Trust, of course, paramount. I don't know that Jolt wins deals because of the brand. To be honest, there's not that much inbound, and usually inbound is different types of deals. The trust with the founders or the CEOs of the companies that we invest in doesn't really come from the brand. But when you're able to tell a CEO that 5 of his 6 patent families are being referenced by 6 mega companies in the world, and that CEO doesn't know that, and you're telling him, I can help you monetize that, there's a very immediate trust that builds. So I don't know that the branding is that, but you have to be, again, consistent. If you are saying, I'm an expert in this field and these sectors, and I have data that you don't, or visibility into data that you don't have visibility into, then you need to be consistent. I think that's the point I'd agree with, is that you absolutely need to walk the talk. And so if you tell a CEO or a founder, hey, you know what, why don't I send you the list of the 50 investors who've invested in your sector? I can't invest right now, but let me send that to you because it's 2 clicks away from me. If you don't follow through with that, then there's no trust. But it's less about branding to me than around walking the talk.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is the emphasis on trust is there. What you say, what you do, what you say, what you do, that cycle needs to be extremely tight. Agreed. I think one area that we've been paying particular attention to, it's so funny because we recently redid our website. So we were working on the copy and I was leading that project. And when we're reviewing the copy, we went through an exercise of what do we want our tone, our brand tone to be. And one of the things that we really zeroed in on was to say, we really don't want to use any superlatives because it's so easy when you're trying to describe what you're doing. It's how do you say it in the most straightforward, plain way? And I was rereading the copy after, and I was like, this actually is incredibly boring. The way we've written it is, it's this is what we do. We partner with entrepreneurs, we launch companies, but it was a choice because the minute that you drift into we're the best at this, or it's just then you're drifting. I don't know. That's a very concrete example of we literally went through the copy and made it more vanilla and more, because we're that's our tone and we want to stick to that and we want to make sure that we're not getting into over-promising land.
So, but that's your voice, right? And what you're doing is, again, it all goes back to authenticity. So it sounds like you're articulating your voice in your copy that goes into your website and probably everything that you do, but it's consistent because then when they meet you, there's that consistency of voice. We actually have a outline of what the McRock voice is. And so we've got a ghostwriter where a team member, for instance, will do a personal blog and they'll write it. And then we give it to our ghostwriter. And then what she does is she's got the McRock voice and she throws it in there and it's playful and whimsical and fun. And then we, of course, have the person confirm that they're okay with what we've put the twist to. And it is really cool, but we have the voice. So your voice is one voice. We've got different. I can only imagine what your voice would be for Jerk.
The voice is important. And it's I'm not trying to change it. I think this is where we can agree on, our voice is very contrarian. That's what we were built on. Something that's a lot of people love in this room, or perhaps more broadly speaking, is unicorns. And I hate that term. And I actually connected with Jean, the CEO of Jolt, on our mutual hatred for unicorns. So I just don't get it. Like, why would we want to our investment to become like this mystical, non-existent, childish animal? That doesn't represent a solid return for me. Like, it's just something that in Harry Potter, the unicorn dies. Like, it's not like the powerful, almighty. And so actually took, again, trying to be ourselves, we said, what horned animal would we rally behind? In Canada, we actually have the narwhal. That's getting better, right? Like, it's still a little mystical, although it's real. Representing what we do at Jolt, we went with the rhino. And I love that. Like, we take baby rhinos, we turn them into young adults, like not fully grown adults because that's not our model, but like, and a rhino I can get behind. Like, they're still endangered, so there's not a lot of them, but try to stop a rhino when it's in full speed, right? That represents an investment I'd want to generate rather than a unicorn that's imaginary. So again, like being that voice, and sometimes it'll ruffle some feathers, sometimes it's humorous, and it's so key. And that's what I think is a great differentiator.
I love the commitment to the large animal analogy. Wonderful.
If we look maybe a little bit forward, we were talking about before about how the world's getting more transparent, right? Like direct channels. You spoke about you preempted the question on the partner, which I found interesting. How do you see the brand, your personal brand, or your firm's brand evolving over the next few years, particularly as we see this acceleration in content creation? And the answer could be is doubling down on IRL events, right? I want to come to the next symposium. So maybe it's things like this that are become more powerful given abundance online. So I don't want to speculate in terms of how you're thinking about the future. I'm just maybe throwing it out there.
Yeah, maybe I'm happy to start. I think for us, one of the big questions I'm asking myself is how do we scale, right? Because we're at that tipping point where, again, as I mentioned, like it's working to be very personal, to be very one-on-one, especially on the founder side. But there's probably a point where that doesn't scale perfectly. And it's so interesting because we've been purposefully, I think, a little bit like we haven't published a lot about exactly what is the diagram model. And as a founder, if you're considering launching a company with us, what does it mean to launch a company with a venture studio? How is that different than just traditional venture? And in the last couple of months, I've been meeting a lot of founders, and I'm actually realizing, I think part of it is serving us because there's not a lot out there, it's actually encouraging word of mouth. And because, to your point, Whitney, we're in a focused geography for the most part, that word of mouth can actually work. It would be impossible if we were all over the world because those founders wouldn't know each other. But because they do know each other, a lot of times they don't have a lot of information. They don't have a choice but to call their friends and ask, have you ever spoken to them? What do you think? So I think it's been serving us well, but I've been realizing that I'm meeting a lot of founders. And when I start to explain to them the model, increasingly their initial reaction is, oh, that's actually a lot more founder friendly than I thought. And so I'm realizing, I'm almost wondering, is it starting to tip into the arena where we would benefit from saying even more? Because that's always for me a bit of a realization where I'm like, wow, okay, you still took my call. Are there people out there who aren't taking my call because they're imagining something that, isn't the reality? Yeah, that's, I think, for us, really something that we're thinking about in terms of just like, how do we scale? And at some point, that one-to-one, you just run out of time. So is it through more people? Is it through people in different roles? We've been thinking a lot about, do we have a person who's 100% focused on founder side, sourcing, et cetera? So that's been the real kind of question on our side.
This is, to be honest, this is hard because your question is saying like, how do you mix the personal brand and the company or the fund brand? Although I'm on stage, I'm not I don't like to be a public person. I don't like to take credit for stuff. I think great for Jolt to take the credit, but at some point we're coming into Canada, people need to hear about us. And so again, I try to go back to that identity. And Jolt is built on this saying, look, people don't believe in what we're doing, and they don't think deep tech is a sector worth investing in, and hardware is where you go to lose money. And so you can't fight it. You can't convince people otherwise, but until you just demonstrate that it happens. And so you just focus on doing great deals. And I think the first deal that Jolt did was a $1.7 billion $1 billion euro exit. So that kind of feel, you're like, oh, actually, yeah, you're doing sensors on what? there was a company that built all the facial recognition sensors for Apple. Pretty cool company. But that's I think that's the approach that I want to take as well. Is I don't want to brag. I don't want to say, look, we're the best, because we're not. There are lots of people doing really good things. I think you just need to deliver, convince people by showing them and accepting that there will be some skeptics. That's okay. My job to convince them, and it's our jobs as investors. It's all the skeptics that. But it's a hard question for me to answer, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So we've had over the years LPs say to us, so how are you going to keep your leadership position? So McRock was the very first venture capital fund in the world that was just exclusively dedicated to the industrial Internet of Things. And that's how we got Cisco and Caterpillar and Electricité de France, but our LP base is predominantly financial institutions. And when this sector started to mature, what we saw was a lot of traditional clean tech funds starting to come into the digital industrial. And we were like, okay, cool. That's great. It means that we weren't nuts, right? And then but how do you still differentiate yourself? So where's the mic drop? How are you going to achieve impact where people go, they've just done something else? And what we did is we are now only exclusively, and it's fascinating because it's really hard for me because I'm a bit of a sensor girl. I've done a lot of sensors, but it's the very first time Fund 3 is focused exclusively on industrial software. And it's because it's finally here. And so now we've got another first that we've done, and we've been able to attract just phenomenal, like Mikhail, a lot of really great investors. And again, we've kept our quotient. 85% of our investors are financial investors and 15% are corporates. And that's it. And it's a tight LP group. And then one of the things we did is we said, okay, what else can we do that's a first? And we launched about a year ago a McRock Industrial Software Index. And we have 30 underlying companies. They're all publicly traded. They have market caps of at least $500 million or more. And you can go on our website and you can actually look at all of the multiples and see how they're faring. So now, from a public equity standpoint, we've got a lot of public equity analysts who are now covering industrial software. It's a standalone category going, wow, this is so cool. And they're citing the index. And you can see how it goes from a resiliency standpoint with these ups and downs in the capital markets. So look for firsts.
I love this. It's so funny because if you were to ask most people, or even in the streets, how many, like, what's the share of S&P 500 companies that are deep tech that say, I don't know, 5, 10%, 50%. 50% of the S&P 500 are deep tech companies, actually, when we really look at it, anchored on IP. Love this. This is exactly it. You need to find it. And then use data to convince otherwise. When it takes 1.3 billion euros to take a digital company to IPO and you do an 11x multiple on a hardware deep tech company, takes 3 times less capital, 480 million and 16x returns. But people don't believe that. They say hardware is a place where your capital goes to die. No, it's true. Keep thinking of that. I'll go in and I'll get great returns. So that's what you need to do. You need to push that information and publish it.
This has been so much fun because it's like, I'm just like selfish here, like asking questions, learning so much. Unfortunately, I don't think we have time for any audience questions. Maybe I just want to say a quick thank you and ask the audience for a warm round of applause. This amazing panel.
Thank you for listening to the Flagship Podcast.